Hi, my name's Shirin and I am a fourth year medical student at UNSW. I spent last year doing clinical placement in an intensive block for a few months at the end of the year thanks to COVID, and obviously I'm currently in lockdown now in Sydney, so my clinical experience is at an all-time low. And I found myself reminiscing on the past year and the stuff that I learnt from it and the things that I will be using moving forward. Because the way that medical school works at UNSW is that you do 4 years where you have somewhat of a clinical experience, and then in 5th and 6th year you're full-time placed at different hospitals and different rotations. So hopefully these lessons will be nice for you if you're a medical student about to embark on placement, or if you're someone who's interested to see what it's like to be a medical student. So let's dive right into lesson number 1, which is the politics of coffee buying and the hierarchy of coffee buyers. In any medical setting, whenever there's a coffee run, the most accredited person in the group will be the one who becomes the glucose guardian and spends all the money on the coffee. As a medical student, it's important that you don't try to disrupt this. It's been in place for many decades and hopefully many more to come. I remember offering to buy an intern a coffee and they were sort of just like, no, it's the other way around. I buy you a coffee, don't ask interns if you can buy them coffee. Whoever's the most accredited, whether that's the intern, the reg, or the consultant, they're the ones that are going to be the glucose guardian and do the spending. Just humbly accept all the free coffee you can as a medical student before you're in the reverse situation where you're the one who has to spend all the money. Lesson number 2 is to keep a little notebook throughout your year or throughout your placement, because this will be your godsend. It's a little bit unprofessional to use your phone or to have an electronic device. I think it can sometimes seem like you're doing other things, whereas with a notebook it's like, what are you gonna do? Like sketch? Whatever. Whereas with a phone or an iPad you could potentially be distracted, or maybe on social media, or like recording stuff. I just find that a notebook gives a little better of a feel. If you're a medical student, I don't know. I also have friends who think that iPads are totally the way to go, so let me know what you think in the comments if you're a medical student on placement. You'll use this for like 3 main things. The first one is to write down patient details or case details. If you come across a patient that you're going to be rounding on or presenting on, this is where you'll write stuff. The second thing you'll use it to do is to write lists of things that you don't know. The number of times I've been on a ward round and the doctor's saying all these words that I just don't understand, and I'll write it down and then I'll go home and refer to this and Google what I need to Google. For example, I questioned hypocortisolism and opioids, PDS, and dexamphetamine. So with prolonged opioid use, sometimes people can have adrenal insufficiency, which is hypocortisolism, and it's thought to be due to the suppression of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, adrenal axis. I don't know what the exact mechanism is, but now I know the relationship. I also wrote down TDS ? That is an abbreviation of the Latin Tedi Semendus. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it means 3 times a day. And then dexamphetamine is a non-opioid pain management amphetamine, so it's like a cousin molecule of methamphetamine, but very much different. It's still a stimulant, but completely different use. And the third time that you'll use this notebook is in your free time. If the doctor's busy, you don't have anything to do, you might find yourself writing notes. So for example, on my pain placement, I wrote a page of notes about the pudendal nerve. So in your spare time you can use this to like write little notes on stuff that you don't know. So yeah, this notebook will be super duper helpful in your little notebook. You might also apply lesson 3, which is to write down what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. And I don't just mean in terms of specialties, although that is really helpful. I mean in terms of your experiences with patients, with doctors, with certain concepts, certain people. I actually keep a diary and I wrote about a couple of different doctors who were super duper helpful to my learning. I'm going to change all the names just for confidentiality reasons, but here's some of the stuff that I wrote. I just finished my pain placement. Dr. Smith is bloody amazing. He'll probably be retired by the time that I practice, but man, he was just so lovely. He loved teaching, he actively tried to help me. He was just a lovely man, and all his patients kept talking about how good he was. And for another doctor in my OBGYN placement at an infertility clinic, I wrote, Dr. Andrews was so lovely with her patients and with me, and I genuinely hope to be as good a doctor and listener as her someday. So basically, I can look back and think of how these doctors or these experiences made me feel, but if I didn't write them down, I wouldn't really know the specifics. So I know what made them good doctors, and I knew what I liked to see from healthcare professionals. On the other hand, when I felt that I wasn't being treated well by doctors, I also made a note of what I didn't like and what I thought, based off how the patients reacted, what patients weren't too comfortable with. And I think this is important because a big part of medicine is not just knowing the drugs and the diseases and all that, but a big part of it is knowing people, and how you make people feel, I think, is so important. And if I can create this vision in my head of what is a good doctor and I can aim for that, I will be happy. On the topic of things that I didn't like, that brings me to lesson number 4, which is that even when you feel terrible, you're not alone. There were several times during my clinical placements where I felt that my experience was just awful. Usually that was to do with the teams that I was attached to and like a lack of teaching and a lack of acknowledgement, but I definitely felt like I was the only one, and I really struggled to tell my friends about it, especially my friends who were at the same hospital, at the same placement as me, because they were all having such a good time and I felt kind of like a Debbie Downer just complaining. I actually wrote in my diary, I can't even talk to Julia without feeling awful. I know I should be happy that my friends are experiencing this great thing, but it's so freaking impossible. I wish I just could tell someone about how I was feeling, and someone who could actually do something about my situation. I need to go for a full body sub for a while. Bye. In retrospect, yes, I was going through a rough time, but I definitely in my head created this isolated situation where I was the only one struggling with placement. When I finally did open up to Julia about how I was feeling, she also mentioned that she felt similar ways and she had really terrible experiences too, and we kind of laughed about it like, oh hey, like we all thought everyone else was living their best life, but you know, it's not always like that. And that wraps up lesson 4, but lesson 5 is also on a bit of a negative note. I'm sorry. Lesson 5 is that if you have high expectations, know how to cope when things don't go to plan. I had this idea of clinical placement as being this magical land where you show up prepared, you do the work, doctors will recognize you, they'll give you more tasks to do, they'll teach you, they'll be excited to have you present and like have you part of the team, and you'll have all these crazy cool experiences with patients. And the reality is that yeah, that happened some of the time, but other times I had a crap time. There were times where my team just like didn't really acknowledge me, or they would like not try to teach me anything, or you know, actively acknowledge my presence, which was a bit shit. But at the end of the day, thankfully I have healthy coping mechanisms and friends I can talk to. I remember taking a Friday off. I took the 15-minute bus to the beach, put on some sunnies, called up my friend, had a cry about just how unfair life was and how all of my expectations were ruined and like nothing was going to plan. There'll be times where it feels anticlimactic and meaningless, but I promise, just have healthy coping mechanisms for those times and you will get through it, and there'll be better placements ahead of you. The 6th and final point that I took away from my clinical teaching was to respect your patients. Medical professionals have such a privileged job. We are privy to the hardest, scariest, most personal parts of someone's life. As a medical student, you're not a big part of their care. So just acknowledging that sometimes people don't want to see you, and if they do want to see you, express your gratitude, because as I said, these people are going through it, alright? They're in hospital, they're in clinic, they're not having the best time of their life, right? So your presence could either contribute to making their stay better, or it could make their stay worse. And you always just want to leave the patient a little bit better off, whether, you know, obviously we can't do much physically or medically, but like emotionally, psychologically, giving them something positive in their day. And recognize that these are not dummies for you to practice on. They're people with like all these things going on, so be pleasant to them. But at the end of the day, if they don't want to see you, don't take it personally. That's totally within their right, and you'll find another patient who'll be willing to have a chat to you, let you examine them, and no matter what, as long as you're respecting their choices, then you're doing a good job. That wraps up my 6 takeaways from my clinical placements last year as a third year medical student. I'm really looking forward to my next placement, and I definitely have a lot more lessons that I learned from all this, and these ones are kind of more on the negative but realistic side. Reflection is a big part of being a good doctor and staying sane. So if you want to reflect on your clinical experience, on good or bad placements, feel free to drop that down in the comments. Just maintain confidentiality, keep it respectful. I'd be interested to hear other people's stories. Alright, that is it for me. It's a little bit unprofessional to